critical thinking skills through communication and questioning. I am thrilled to have you here today as we dive into strategies that will not only engage our students, but also challenge them to think more deeply and critically. My name is Molly Jackson, and I will be your professional development presenter today. If throughout this you have any questions, please just stop me, and I will be more than happy to answer any of your questions. So in this session, what we are going to be doing is we are going to explore the vital role that effective communication and thoughtful questioning play in the learning process. And then we are going to take that and we're going to use it like in a real world, real classroom examples that hopefully you can take and you can take back to your own classroom and utilize them. Okay. All right, so today our main goal is going to be able to equip you as elementary school teachers with practical strategies to enhance your students' critical thinking skills through effective communication techniques. We want to be able to provide you with the tools and the confidence to be able to create a classroom environment where students are going to feel encouraged to think deeply and express their thoughts clearly. So by the end of this lesson, our success criteria, what we should be able to do, excuse me, we want to be able to understand the relationship between critical thinking and communication in the elementary school classroom. And you're going to see how these skills are intertwined and how effective communication can help you dive into a deeper thinking. So we're going to be able to link these skills also directly with your curriculum standards, and you'll gain an insight into how critical thinking and communication align with what you are already teaching. I want to be ensure that these strategies are both relevant and practical to your classroom. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, awesome. All right, I do want you to know that it's important to note how today's PD directly aligns with our district's broader framework. Okay, our district's broader framework and our evaluation standards, specifically through our Tyler ISD True Framework, and also our evaluation in our rubric that we have, our T-test communication. So every single thing that we're doing here is going to check off all of those boxes that you see on our T-test evaluation. So this PD is relevant and is practical for you to use. Okay. All right, so we are going to get started with a little icebreaker activity here. It's going to get it started. This is a fun little game. If you kind of want to take it and play with your students, it's kind of a low stress game that they can play at the beginning of at any time in your classroom. It's just the objective is to get them to be thinking about and practicing the art of questioning. So it is called 1 minute question storm. So what you're going to do here in just a second, you are going to pair up with a partner. We might need to do a 3 and a 2, that's fine. And then you're going to take turns asking each other as many open-ended questions as you can think of in 1 minute. The questions should be related to this quote, and I'll read the quote to you here in just a second. And they can be about teaching, they can be about education, or any thought-provoking questions specifically aligned with this quote, and then we are going to share. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the directions? Okay, so we're going to pair up in just a second. We are going to be asking open-ended questions. That is the key for 1 minute, back and forth. So one person will answer or say a question, next person will say a question. You do not have to answer these. Okay, so be thinking of questions in your head. I'm going to read it to you. The future of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Okay? All right, so find a partner. Get with your partner. On your mark. Get set. Go.
How do we balance intelligence plus and character in our curriculum?
Ooh, dang, good one. Well, I don't have to answer it all.
I was going to say, how do we develop or help the students develop character within our curriculum?
How can
Yeah, 'cause
we
mostly we
ensure
tend to
that
focus more on
students
intelligence.
are thinking
Maybe that could be the
critically
question. How do we
and doing it in a way
not
that
focus too much on
their
intelligence?
partners
Because
feel
if that is the goal,
And maybe what specifically does think intensively and think critically look like in our classrooms?
I'm hearing some pretty good questions
do you
here.
think his definition
You got about
of true
15
education
seconds.
and then how are
would
children?
change
How can we get
today?
kids to show
Today's society?
intelligence and
Okay.
show character without
Yes.
just like
As
scoring
an
on a test?
educator, how do we
You know,
know
that's
that
more than
we're
that. How do we make it the
meeting that
goal?
for all of our
Okay.
students?
Time. Good job. I heard a lot of really good questions. So who would like to share some of their questions that they came up with? Anybody? Anybody at all?
I'll share one of hers.
Okay.
Nicole said, how do we make sure that our curriculum reflects intelligence plus character?
Very good. That's a good one. Open-ended. Excellent. One more? Anybody like to share? I think Risa, you've come up with one. I heard.
How do we help our students develop character in the classroom?
Okay, how do we help our students develop character? Very good. So those are all some great questions that we came up with. So I want to ask really quick, what was the purpose of this activity that we just did? Does anybody know the purpose?
To model what we expect from our students in the classroom.
Kind of model what we expect from our students. Did anybody kind of find it a little hard?
Yeah, I think if we can realize what our expectations are of students, but we practice it, we see that it is actually difficult to come up with those kind of questions.
Yeah.
And so we can't just expect our students to be able to do it by saying, come up with. We have to really work hard and show them how to do that.
Yeah, we have to model how to do it, because when we start to do something like this, we realize that it's not that easy. Especially like when it's on the fly. Hey, come up, let's do this. And it takes practice to be able to do something like this. So again, yes, this short activity like this, and it can also spark deeper thinking and also conversation. I heard a bunch of things that I didn't think of. And I was like, oh, Risa, I like that one, you know? So a lot of the times when you're asking questions, you're coming up with something that maybe you didn't quite think of. So, very good. So let's get started. We're going to be talking about what is critical thinking. So, critical thinking, if I was to ask every single person in here, I was to ask Kayla, I was asked to Heather, hey, can you give me a definition of what critical thinking is? Chances are, 100% chance, we would all come up with a slightly different definition. Around about, it would kind of be the same, but no two people are going to have the exact same definition. So one of the definitions is to critical thinking is the ability to analyze information objectively and make a judgment or a decision. That's a little hard for our students to understand. If you would have asked our students, they would say that critical thinking means using our brain to think carefully or clearly about something, maybe being a detective, maybe inferring. It helps us make good decisions and understand something. But ultimately, it is an in-depth understanding, and we are being engaged and curious when we are learning. And just like, this is important to note, that just like that each of us would have a different definition, not everyone is going to solve a question the same or come up with the same answer. That is the whole point of critical thinking. Now, the role of communication in critical thinking. So I want you to think about how many times have we asked a question in class, called on a student, and they were not able to verbalize the answer. They knew the answer. I know that happens to me all the time. I can tell that they know the answer, but I forgot. They are not able to verbalize what they are thinking. They are not able to articulate their thought process. Communication is extremely important in all aspects, in elementary, middle school, high school. But here in elementary school, we are setting the foundation of the communication process and how it works. So we should be teaching and modeling kids how to communicate. They don't know how to communicate. We have to teach them how to communicate. And there has to be lessons on how to communicate. So, with that being said, how do we teach kids how to communicate? So children must be taught how to think, not what to think, as Margaret Mead said. So as this discussion, I want us to talk about how do you teach kids how to think versus what to think. So I want you to take about 20 seconds, think about that in your mind. How do you teach kids how to think versus what to think? We can tell them what to think all day long. We can tell them the answers all day long. But is a child truly learning when we do that? Thumbs up when we're ready. All right, so who would like to start this off? What's something that you thought about teaching kids how to think?
I think, like for math, instead of putting a problem on the board and telling them to use like a standard algorithm, like a set of rules, give them manipulatives in a problem and tell them they cannot use pencil or paper, but they have to use manipulatives and work with partner where they're discussing and really trying to figure out with objects how to solve it so they can explain what they did instead of on paper.
Okay, very good. Excellent. Anybody else?
I think they need that like productive struggle kind of model for
Yes.
them, because they want to be, you just tell them what to think. They want to be spoon fed sometimes because it's easier. I mean, we do too, we're adults, but kind of have it modeled, your thinking process, saying it out loud as you're, working a math problem or setting something up or just thinking about a passage, just that model of your own thinking for them.
You could validate even their wrong answer. Say, I see how you got that. Try and just try setting them in a different direction. So not just saying you're wrong. You're just saying, okay, you're getting there now. Point them in a different direction. Validate even their mistakes.
I like how she said that, because also that is also part of it, is creating a safe environment. Is part of teaching them that it's okay to make mistakes, and that's going to help us think even deeper, is to make those mistakes. So making that safe classroom to where a kid feels okay to raise their hand and feels comfortable to raise their hand. Because how many times do we go somewhere and we don't want to raise our hand because it's like, what if our answer isn't, what it's supposed to be, And I know that kids feel that way, so setting that safe classroom, very good. Anybody else have any idea how to teach kid to think?
I think maybe as a teacher, purposefully making a mistake and like just give the kids a minute and see if they can tell you why you were wrong. Like not telling them you're making a mistake, but make one and then let them really think about it. And then you're teaching them also how to communicate if something is wrong, and you can be like, oh, you're right, I did make a mistake. Thank you. Like encouraging that.
Very good, very good.
Using some of those like sentence stems to kind of get deeper.
Okay.
Like, okay, but, what can you add on to that? Or what do you agree with that they said and why? A little deeper thinking.
Okay. Yes. Sentence stem, deeper thinking. Excellent. So those are all skills that we have. So we have to teach this skill development. So what the teacher is doing is they were clearly and accurately communicating to support persistent and deeper thinking. So by critical thinking is a skill that we are continually develop. And these are all some things that we came up with. And we were like, hey, you can do it this way. You can do it this way. We talked about that culture of acceptance, providing that wait time, because productive struggle, as Angel suggested, that wait time, because they need to take a second. They just need to know that you're not automatically going to give them the answer. Okay? Logic puzzles, debate session, group projects, turn and talks, modeling. All these are ways to develop these skill sets in the classroom. And again, I could go and I could do a professional development on every single one of these, but for this instant right here, we are going to just be talking about our higher level questioning. That's what I kind of want to focus on, is our higher level questioning today. So asking questions. So this is what we want to be able to teach our kids, how to ask questions. And we also want to be able to ask, what questions do we ask of the kids? And sometimes that can be hard. We were asking the right question. Okay. So we want to be able to push students to think more deeply through questioning. And we're going to force them to take chances with their answers. And this right here is also where that safe environment comes in, because we are forcing them to take chances with their answers. Is my answer correct? Do I feel comfortable enough to stand up to the class and say something and not just automatically, oh, you're wrong, sit back down? Okay? So what we are all striving to be is a distinguished teacher. And those distinguished teachers, what you are doing is you are constantly asking questions in your classroom. You're constantly have your students asking questions. And you're wanting to be on the highest cognitive level as possible. That is how you get your students to learn. So, with that being said, one way that I do it in my classroom is something that I teach at the beginning of the year. I kind of model how to ask questions, and we kind of have this little anchor chart with asking questions called thin versus thick questions. So I teach my students what are thin questions. So as we know, those thin questions, those are the ones that are easily there. You can immediately go in the text and you can find the answer to them. They are who, what, when, where, and how. They are going to be on the lower side of the balloons, like remembering and understanding. They're going to be yes or no questions that you have. But then there's also thick questions. These are the questions that you have to search for. They're not automatically there. A lot of the times they have to be inferred. You have to go and really search for them, and they are those open-ended questions. And this is our goal for the kids. And usually this is along the lines of more the higher end of the balloons that we have going on. But I want to stress to kids that to be here, you have to answer these questions first. You have to be able to understand the basics before you can go into critical thinking. Now, how do we do that with our lessons? How do we make sure that that's happening and that we're just not asking on the fly just these basic remembering and understanding questions? Because I know as a teacher sometimes that when I'm trying, that sometimes I end up saying here, can you define this for me? Can you locate this for me? Because these are the easier ones. It's even easier as me as a teacher to go and say, hey, this is easier to do. But we want to push ourselves too to be able to asking some of these questions and modeling this for our students. So, with that being said, I want to take and I want to apply our learning today. So thank y'all. Y'all been sitting here. It's been great. I want us to take now kind of what we've learned and I want us to put it together. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to plan questions that require critical thinking for lessons. So it's important when you are planning, you're going ahead and you are pre-planning these questions out. Okay, so we are pre-planning these questions out. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our standard, any standard that's related, okay? And we know that we normally classify as our students, especially if you are in upper elementary, 3, 4, and 5, you classify your students in these categories: does not meet, approaches, meets, and masters. We know that teaching is not a one-size-fits-all. Kids come into our classroom that are on all sorts of levels. We cannot be asking questions here or here and expect these kids to grow. We cannot be asking questions staying in the lower end of blooms and be expecting these students to grow. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have all the types of questions. You can use this whole group, you can use it small group, you can use it anywhere. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your standard. So I decided to go with 4th grade ELAR. Explain the author's purpose and message within a text. This is our descriptor word. For a kid to be on grade level, they have to explain this. So I like to start off, when I'm doing this, I like to start off on meets, because meets is on grade level. So explaining. So my question should have them explaining. How would you explain the author's purpose to a classmate? They are having to communicate. To get on the higher end of your balloons, the higher question, you're always writing and you're always communicating. So, how would you explain the author's purpose to a classmate? If they can do that, they are meeting the grade level standard. We also know that whether you're in science, you're in math, you're in reading, you are asking your kids to prove themselves. Prove that. How'd you figure that out? So a question is, what evidence in the text supports your opinion about the author's purpose? So you're taking the exact wording that's in your standard and you are putting it into your questions. Now, what about my other ones? Does not meet. We know that does not meet is going to be at least 2 grade levels or below. So for a 4th grade standard, that means it's going to be kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade that child is going to be on. So you're going to go back and you're going to vertically align. What connects with this standard? For them to be able to meet this standard, what does their prior knowledge have to be? This is also scaffolding, differentiation. You're using all of that. So you're going back, and I know before they can understand author's purpose, they have to comprehend the text. What is the main idea of the text? Can you list 3 key points? I could add more on there too. Approaches, that's usually 1 grade level below. So I'm in 4th grade, so that means a 3rd grade. Well, a 3rd grade vertically aligned, they're asking, what is the author's purpose? Why do you think the author wrote this text? Okay, how would you summarize the message of the text? And then also, you have your masters. This is going to be on the higher level of blooms, and you're going to be looking at those ones that are creating. How effective is the author in conveying their message? It's a little bit harder. That's more of an open-ended question, right? Okay. Can you create a poster or presentation that depicts the author's message and present it to your classmates? Are they able to teach? If they're able to teach it, they know it. So a lot of times with that. So what we are going to be doing, okay, it is your turn. You have their option. I have a 3rd grade math standard. I have a 5th grade science standard, and I have a 5th grade grammar standard. I kind of took the teachers that I had here today. You're going to take and you're going to find those descriptor words. And I would suggest starting off with your meets standard and coming up with your meets questions first. It could be 1 question, 2 questions, however you want, and then branching out to your questions. I have provided you with your blooms chart so you can kind of go and find those keywords, those descriptor words. Your standards here, and each here it's telling you what to focus on. You're going to come up with your questions. You won't be able to completely finish this, guys, and that's fine, but just kind of getting your idea, thinking about it. And then hopefully, like when we come back for our next PD, you'll be able to say, hey, I implemented this in my classroom, and this is how it worked. Okay? All right, so grammar? I have my grammar people over here. All right, got my science person back there. Okay, and my math peeps. Okay, if you have any questions as you're going, I'll be more than happy to help you and to answer the questions. I'm just going to be walking around and seeing what you're coming up with. Feel free to work together. I know, Nicole, you're kind of by yourself, but Angel has taught science before, so I know she can help you, and so has Heather and Kayla. So we kind of all medley here.
Let's see, our verb, she said, start with edit.
Yes,
So
your verb.
propose and edit drafts using standard English conventions, including past tense or regular verbs. And then we'll start with meets. Right. And then what was your verb?
Describe.
Describe. Somebody's prepared. starting with meets,
compose and
what
decompose.
actually the standard is, edit drafts using standard English convention, so ask the question.
Using objects.
Edit the draft to correct
So that's
any
important. Pictorial models.
irregular
and numbers.
or past tense errors.
So remember here, use it exactly as the TEAC states. So what you're doing is you're underlining
Would you put,
those.
how would
Mhm.
you?
And then
So,
applying,
like, first
analyzing.
you would need to-
So your question would have to
How would
say
you,
compose and decompose.
this is probably too simple, but like how would you
Those.
determine what past
And you were
tense
either
or what
writing
tense
or communicating.
the
Okay.
author is using within like, maybe how do you know what tense the author is using? Cause you gotta be able to identify that before you can edit it, right?
Oh, like what other
So
words in the
that-
text?
Yeah. Like knowing if it's past or present or past tense or feeling.
So what would kind of be an example of an past tense irregular verb?
Like went for go,
Yes.
right?
Mhm. Yes.
Mhm.
Um, ate for eat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you're using those, so you could use examples of those in your text, because it says in a edit drafts using the standard English convention. So it doesn't say necessarily if it's in a text or if it's in, a sentence or what it's in.
Okay.
I mean, one thing we could do is.
So we could just say it's like a sentence example,
Mhm.
edit the sentence to correct past
Give
tense and
them-
irregular verb
Give
errors.
them a number.
But think about in fifth
And
grade,
then
what are we
have them
normally in
break
fifth
it down
grade
into, like,
having them do?
Just
Write the
regular.
sentence.
ECR.
The sentence,
Yeah.
yeah, ECR, but
Yeah.
also in our revising and editing, is it usually one sentence?
Further.
Combining.
Have them
It's
Yeah.
combining
Yeah.
sentences, or it's like a whole, it's a story, and they're finding it in the story.
Right.
310s, have them do like 13 tens.
So maybe
or
in
like-
the master's
like
room,
have
how would you
them make it to where they're having to
effectively
create their own model
Mhm.
and share it.
Yeah, that's kind of its
Is
own
there something-
standard
yeah.
too,
And then they
that's
can-
why I'm like,
Then they could show
if they're
how they
having
would
to
actually
communicate or
prove
write here,
that that
you could just say like, how could you explain to a friend?
that it is equal.
Right, if
Yeah,
they
so
made
So
an
it's gonna
error
look completely different, but then
in
they're
their
Mhm.
verb tense.
Instead of like 100,
Let's start with that.
three tens, that
Would you
13
explain
tens.
Or
is the
writing
same
would
thing,
be
same
when they
value.
even have to
Right.
correct it,
Even though they don't
or
look the same.
rewrite it
Decomposed.
in the correct way.
Yeah.
So that would be.
Nicole,
them.
what are you
I mean, I
coming
feel
up
like
with
that
here?
would be more here because they're
Probably,
creating
yeah.
something.
So as an
How would you
approaches
correct
before
And
you
then
could
having to
even get to this
explain,
part of
like
a food
having
web,
them explain.
a
Well,
third
they're
grade
having to
teacher,
take what
this
they
was
know
food
from everything they're
chains,
having
was
to
just
read.
just one
It's like
single
a
line,
section
so
thing.
just making
Yes.
sure that we understand the food chain.
I mean, you could even,
And then that
Mhm.
way
You
we have
just
the
say
ability
lied
to
because you say
describe
lied
the difference
directly
between
to
a
the-
food chain and a
Yeah.
food
How to
web.
correct,
Okay.
is the same
So,
thing
this
as,
one.
Why?
irregular
Ask me about food chains
One
before.
100.
and
Okay.
then
To bring
Okay.
these kids up
Yeah.
before we start with the food web, adds a lot more complexity.
Yes,
Regular
yes.
So.
So going back and finding your,
Right,
I guess, teachers in
Vertically.
fourth and third grade,
Yeah.
rolled into,
and seeing what they have,
like they're using this.
okay?
Right.
In real life, or there's a real world example, or find a real world example, and explain
Well,
that.
it says in how it meets.
And so then if they're close to
So
that,
we want to
their
put that on
approaches.
masters, so I feel like that is higher.
Yeah.
So
So how could you identify
we are going to.
an incorrect verb tense?
Trying to think.
But doesn't use it to call it past tense or do it
If
past
they,
tense.
if they
Yeah,
do
it
what we're
could be.
talking about,
Yeah.
so they created this,
Mm-hmm.
we could do like around the world, so like if somebody from the other table, other group has to come over and they have to decompose that. So they
Mhm.
composed
Or
it,
even just
Right.
verbs.
and then when
period.
they created their own, but now they're
Mhm.
having to go and decompose,
Mhm.
so they're having
Which
to do
ones are
both,
past tense?
Yeah.
compose and decompose, but on somebody
Check all
else's.
the verbs and just
Mhm.
identify.
Would that still fall under
circle the
meets
verbs.
stuff? If it's just composing and decomposing?
Well, if they created it,
Check
right,
by-
they created, and they have to go through all those steps.
Yeah.
Because then they're having to, and then
I'm
they
listening
have
to
to
this.
people's
Okay.
mistakes, right?
Mhm.
So
Something
they're
like
having
that.
to justify.
Or come up with another way to
Jack of all
compose
trades.
it from
Mhm.
the original, or
Mhm.
compose it a
Something
different
that's-
way, or,
Mm-hmm.
or to take it and push it that next step.
Yeah.
To make it
their original work, not totally different.
So then for masters,
Different.
maybe not only are they editing,
Rewrite
So
it.
then
they're like
like
creating, yeah, like there's,
Rewrite the passage.
It's not that easy. It's not.
Like I can think it and I can
Yeah.
have this activity, but putting
Yeah.
it into words is
Yeah.
a little
maybe
more.
rewrite
That's
the
it,
present.
and that's the thing
complicated,
is sometimes
maybe
like
rewrite it in
with
the
us
past,
that
like,
we
so
are
they're
thinking
changing
on
it
more
all
of
to the
those does not
past.
meet questions because they're easier. They're easier
Right.
to find, and so it's not as simple. And so we got to think when our kids are asking these
Which
questions
maybe,
too.
how would you,
Like you're veering more towards
well, that would be writing,
those
so.
easier questions to ask.
So a lot of the examples in masters are create,
Mm-hmm.
right? But like, I guess my question is, where would your masters? Because I feel like you could get a masters question that would be evaluated.
Yes,
right?
you
Right?
could. Yes, because
Okay.
you could argue or praise, judge,
defend.
defend
You
an
could
answer,
analyze.
going
Okay.
back because
Like
they're being able to communicate and doing that.
Masters.
So
Yeah,
you're
because
looking
sometimes you just
more-
don't have the time to do.
Yes,
that
yes. So
all
you're
the time.
looking more. These
More
right here are
complex,
more your does not
using more
meets.
complex
Like,
sentences.
This can
Especially
kind of
for
fall into
you're
some of your
getting that
approaches,
information.
your
Sentences to make
meets,
more
and then you're
complex.
getting at the top.
Yeah,
of your
yeah,
masters.
so like these
Just
overlap.
So it doesn't
Depending on the
necessarily-
question.
Yeah, it doesn't just
So
have to be
definition makes
create
sense.
for masters.
Yeah.
You
Do
could
more
be
than one standard.
evaluating
Yeah.
and judging,
Which
Yeah.
where it's like, what is
Critiquing.
critiquing.
Right.
Yes,
Like looking at
there.
someone else's, like maybe you create, you can have your kids create a food web,
Yes.
and then have
Yeah.
somebody else come in
Uh-huh.
and explain that food web or critique.
Yes.
Yours
Understanding.
the correct.
Yeah.
So
So a lot
that
of the
here would
times
be like-
you have to
What is
teach
verb
something
tense
too.
when
You have to be able to
combining
really
sentences.
understand
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Line based.
Like what
Yeah.
is
Cause you know fifth
And
grade
that's
grammar,
even
they're
for
gonna
me
have to
in
combine
place value
sentences.
too.
Yes, they will have to
It's
combine
usually a
sentences.
compound sentence that they're asking for.
And it's not
Place
fun.
value,
You know that.
Like the digital.
they're
I'll
gonna
even
have to
say
write
that that
themselves,
is
like,
kind of do where I really have to sit down and I have to be like,
Which is-
okay, let me answer these myself before I can teach them a lot of the times.
The rewriting ones are hard, especially when they're
Yes.
typing it in because
Yes.
I think so.
there's more than one correct answer.
There is,
Right.
and that's another thing. There is more
Like, I
than
know
one
y'all
correct
got
answer,
$100
especially with
for
ELAR
this.
too,
Mm-hmm.
and grammar. I know math. A
And
lot
then
of
if they
times
forget
it's
the
one
period,
answer,
you're
but
like,
yes,
So this is
yes.
third grade. This
You
would be
have to
more like
practice that all year.
running
Okay,
first.
so for
literally
approaches,
what is the value
Mhm.
of
changing
this 10
the
block?
Being able to
incorrect
relate
past tense
to
verb
Mhm.
to the
that.
correct.
The
Yeah,
base 10
cause here
blocks
they've
to an
identified
actual
it,
value.
then
Now they
they're
have to-
actually changing it
Yeah.
and then explaining why they would have to, so.
I don't even think they're here yet.
I did too.
No.
Okay, you got about 30,
No,
45
based on
seconds
the
left.
value.
30, 45
They're not
seconds.
gonna
I'm hearing a lot of good talking and questioning.
Could you give them like for this one for masters, since we're describing the flow,
Mhm.
could you give them a food web with an error and just say, looking at this food web, do you agree with it or disagree with it? Be able to defend your answer.
Defend your answer,
Yeah,
yes,
the
because they would be
Because then they would
again,
have to explain,
critiquing and explaining
and then
ending.
and when they're
Yes.
explaining, they're
Yeah.
gonna ultimately have to describe how the
Yeah.
energy
Use a
moves.
dictionary.
So, and also being able to find a mistake in
we
there,
can
saying
use-
there is a
yes,
mistake, but I'm not
true.
telling you what it is.
Okay.
They have to be able to understand it. So finding that mistake, yes, that would be the process of understanding it, and then
Yes, because they have that access to that.
okay, all right. Finish your thoughts out, please.
Atrocious today.
No, I haven't written as much this summer.
I know it's kind of getting back in the flow of things. All right, I saw a lot of great thinking and stuff going on. This is not as easy as you expect it to kind of be. Like, we kind of tend to be like, let's go more towards those does not meet approaches, lower end of the balloons, to make it a little bit easier with those open-ended questions. So this is why it's extremely important to come in and to kind of pre-plan your questions. And especially if you're staying in the field, it's like, hey, I have these, and you have them from years to come. It could be one question, you could eventually have 20 questions. You could have your students come up with questions. But who would like to share? I'd like each group to kind of share your question, kind of your thought process of this, just anything that you kind of took from this. Math, would y'all, third grade math, compose, decompose, you got your verbs there. Would you like to kind of explain y'all's thought process of this?
Yes. So we started with the masters section. I mean, you have to know what compose and decompose means, obviously. But we were talking about like posing a number on the board in expanded form, and then asking them to create a model different from that. So if we had 432, it would be 400 plus 30 plus 2. And so then they're going to have to create a model, but something that is not 3 tens. So how can you decompose one of those hundreds, right? And then place those hundreds into your tens place. So now you have 13 tens. And having them justify why that is still the same value. So if you have both of those numbers, it's still the same number, but they are shown in different ways. But then being able to explain why 13 tens, why you can do that and it still be the same.
I know a lot of times, like I've never taught math. I'm more of a English language arts person. But I remember even like college math too. It was like, here's this one problem. I did this problem. I got the problem. Yay, I answered the problem. And then I go to take the test and I'm like, whoa, I didn't understand
Because you
that
didn't
at all.
know.
I didn't know the process of how it was. So yes.
Right.
Yes, that is a very big thing for it. All right, science. 5th grade science. Our verb describe. Nicole?
Yes. So I did a lot, but the ones that I tend to have a trouble with are the masters ones, going beyond them creating something. So I focused on that one, and my thought for the food webs was actually projecting a food web with a mistake and having the students, can you find the error and then explain why it is a mistake? Because in order to be able to do that, you have to know the standard to describe the energy flow.
Yes.
And including the sun, the producers,
Yeah.
consumers, and decomposers.
Yeah, very good. And we also talked about how, which with your science, you were like, they have to be able to understand the, for the lower, the approaches,
yes.
the chain.
food
Yeah,
chains.
you have to be able to understand a chain before you can understand a web.
And I thought that was a good question too. Can you explain the difference between a food chain and a food web? Because if you can explain that difference, then you're on your way to understanding what a food web is. They both talk about the flow of energy, so you're able to compare and contrast them.
Okay.
And I think that leads to better understanding.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Okay. Grammar over here. Y'all had a lot of good questions and kind of coming out as from what I heard.
Oh, all right. Well, we will talk about the masters. So we said at the masters level, instead of having them find mistakes, we're going to give them a passage. Could be a paragraph, could be something they've already written, that's in present tense, and have them change the whole thing to past tense.
Okay. That's a good one. Changing it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then at the lower does not meet, we started with identifying the verbs, which ones are past tense, and moved up to correcting incorrect ones using dictionaries if they need to, because a lot of them don't know some of those past tense verbs. And then at the meat level, we said, like the standard says, how would you correct it? How would you explain it to a friend why it needs to be corrected? So you still have to articulate that you know it's wrong, but why it's wrong.
Okay. All right. Very good. Excellent. I liked all those. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add that they did for this? Is this something that you think that you could take back whenever you are planning with your partner and be able to utilize? Is this something that you would utilize?
I think this is I already made a note to like maybe in our LAFA, when we have to put in what they know and things like that as part of it on there, I was thinking about even start compiling questions. These does not meets and approaches. I feel like I tend to sit at being able to on the fly come up with meets questions, but it's a little bit more to remember and vertically align. Okay, so what are they actually needing to know before they can get here? And so pre-planning these questions, I think I'm definitely going to go in and just have a few questions to make sure that I hit at least a master's question and have ones ready to pull up those kids that are not on grade level.
And also in your mind, whenever you are having discussions, you know what kids are. You know if Joey does not meet. You know if Anna is masters. And so when you're asking these questions to call on people, this is a great call response too. If you know your question is a does not meet question, go ahead and call on Joey, who are like, I know can answer this and get it right. That's going to boost his confidence. And he is answering a question. Because you know Anna could answer them. if she's masters, and then kind of figure out my students that are in does not meets, call on those students to answer, or maybe even try to get them to bump up to the next. But we don't want to be asking Joey a master's level question because his hand's never going to be raised. Okay, so that's something else good, like if it's whole group, or you could use them for
in small group. I think when you're walking around, if they're working on a project, just having these ready, like, have you ever thought about this? Having those upper level ones for those prepared, I think would be very useful.
Yes, excellent, very good. I really liked a lot of the discussions and stuff that we had going on there. It was really good. So, kind of our final thoughts. We're wrapping up. We have about 5 or 6 more minutes before y'all are being let go. Final thoughts. So, do you believe that this will be beneficial in your classroom? Let's kind of think about it, kind of discuss it with each other. You can do turn and talk partners, as I do with mine. Beneficial in your classroom. Why or why not? Because I want to hear if you think, hey, I don't think this would be beneficial. I think this would be more beneficial. So please do let me know, because I love hearing what other people are doing in their classrooms too. I kind of take it and put it in my teacher tool belt. So what do we think? Do we think that they believe this is going to be beneficial in your classroom? Why or why not?
Yes.
Sure. I like what you said about planning them ahead of time.
It'll be nice.
And then I think she said a minute ago, keeping them for future use every time I'm going back to the standard. Right?
Yeah.
I can look at the questions I've already made.
And even if I come up with one in class where a discussion that I wasn't going to see led somewhere, like sometimes those kids bring up questions that I didn't even think about, so just making note of those. Because I'm not a 5th grader, you know what I mean, and I don't know what they're coming in, but this was one of my goals for this year, was to at least have some of these questions ready, and I love this idea for even small group, just making sure that I'm in the right place, okay, they need to be able to answer these questions, or there's no reason why I should be giving them, the 5th grade needs. So.
I'm thinking for those test prep editing questions, just giving, how you get just giving.
Okay, so beneficial, not beneficial, why or why not? Beneficial, not beneficial, why or why not? One person answer. I heard a lot of great discussions and stuff going on.
I like her idea. Yes, it would be beneficial for sure. And then she was talking about how we monitor and adjust with our clipboard when we're walking around the classroom. Mm-hmm. If you have different levels of questions, then if you know Joey does not meet, you already have questions, so when you're walking around you can ask him, build that confidence, especially if he's doing this on his own, he's able to answer that successfully, but just having them ready. I always tried
monitoring and adjusting for the student, so there's another check.
You get that too.
Yeah.
I told her I was always doing that, the morning of, trying to come up with questions. But if we're doing this in our planning, then we already have it and it's ready to go.
Yeah, I try to make things a little bit easier as we go. We know our life's not that easy a lot of times.
And understanding that you don't need 5 master's questions, right? We just need a few just to get the conversation, and that one might lead to other ones just on them, just naturally.
Yes. Okay, so I heard a lot of this. Do you plan on incorporating critical thinking questions into your existing curriculum? I'm hearing a lot of, we're already answering that question. So, quick question though before we kind of end. What is one strategy or technique from today's session that you definitely want to implement in your classroom? Because a lot of the times when I have a PD, I take 1 or 2 things. I don't take the whole thing. So what is something that you're oh, I'm definitely using that?
Okay, so I'm really excited because this year for my class meetings, just to kind of build that safe environment, I was starting every day with something, and Monday is Motivational Monday, where I was going to bring up these quotes, and I was like, oh, I'll just come up with a question. But what if I let them, it's the 1 minute open discussion, you got to come up with questions, and then we just choose one, I call on a person, what was your open-ended question? So that way, with low stakes, we're practicing questioning, and it's not tied to content. It's just something interesting and then it starts the discussion. So I really love that.
Okay, great. I'm glad that y'all can take something from this. So I saw that activity and I was like, oh, that's a great low stakes activity to kind of get kids to think about questioning. So I really did like that one. So Excellent. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add?
I liked explicitly teaching the students the difference between thick and thin questions.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
like, so that if you said, let's get a little thicker, you know,
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
know what that means.
Yeah, they definitely do. And I always teach at the beginning of the year. And sometimes they even come back and I'm like, hey, let's remember our thick and thin questions. I usually put it on I have like an anchor chart thing for them to go back and look at, and they know like when we're talking about and we're discussing. So that's something. So excellent. All right. So today, I feel like this was very successful and that we learned a lot and we took a lot from this. So remember, our goal is to encourage our students to think deeply, ask questions, and express their thoughts clearly. By doing so, we are not only meeting our curriculum standards, but we're also preparing our students for a future where critical thinking and communication skills are essential in the classroom and beyond. I hope that you found this session informative and empowering. And thank you for your active participation and thoughtful contributions today. Your dedication to improving your teaching practices and supporting your students is truly commendable, and I really do appreciate y'all coming in and helping and taking part of your day to be here with me and reviewing this stuff. Before we end, does anybody have anything else, any questions or anything else that they would like to add to this? Any things that if I do this professional development again, saying, hey, I would change this or I would do this differently?
One thing just to like be an encouragement is like, this seems like it might be a lot at first. Maybe don't start with every single standard every single day. Like find your power ones, your important ones, and then maybe it'll bleed into some of the others more naturally.
Yes.
Because I know whenever I get something new, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take it and run with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
just
you
take
hit
one
a
at a
wall.
time to do
Right.
this. Yes, I completely agree with that. Breaking it into chunks
Yeah.
more than looking at it as a whole. So, excellent. All right. Well, again, thank y'all so much. There are refreshments back there. Please take your pick at whatever you want. The little composition notebooks as a thank you. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.